Awesome. Well, thanks so much for, willing to chat with me. As I kind of alluded to, so my name's Awais Rani. I'm an emergency medicine physician in Houston, Texas. Kind of developed a Web3 blockchain NFT interest about a year ago. I'd say maybe the first 6 to 8 months of that was pretty disorganized, more kind of seeing stuff on Twitter and kind of seeing what the hype was about and kind of more from a kind of cultural standpoint. And then the last few months, the interest more became, how is this impacting society and, things that are going to be long lasting past, a certain type of hype project. And so that's healthcare, finance, things like that. Obviously, as a physician, the majority of my interest is in healthcare and kind of seeing how this technology, could change healthcare, solve a lot of the problems that we have in healthcare. And those have been kind of the questions I've been asking. The best way I found to kind of go about it was obviously A, reading a bunch of stuff online, but B, talking to folks who do this day to day and know about it. And so that's when I started, searching for folks. And obviously your name came up and you have a few Medium pieces published. You work at IBM, you work with healthcare and blockchain and whatnot. And that's why I reached out. So I guess my first question is, what is your role at your IBM, your day-to-day, and how do you work in this space?
Yeah, so I, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts and looking forward to this. Secondly, my role within IBM is really twofold. One, I work specifically with clients on a broad set of their technology problems. That could be anything from supply chain to analytics to cloud transformation. So things that you would expect IBM to be focused on. That's roughly half my job. The other half of my job is looking a little bit further into the future. So what does Web3 mean for healthcare? What does an NFT mean in a healthcare context? So I spent a lot of time working on different thought pieces on that and discussing with clients how this might play out and how they can prepare themselves, and also some of what other people are doing that could potentially be threats to their business models and what steps they need to be taking to be ready for those incumbents that will be edging their way into the healthcare space as we have this paradigm shift from Web 2 to Web 3.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember seeing IBM commercials on the TV, specifically like during golf tournaments and whatnot. And, they're really cool and inspiring. But, as a kid, you're like, what does that even mean? And now kind of looking into this stuff, it's like, oh, some of that makes sense, like transformational change that's very complicated, but there's folks like you who do it on a day-to-day basis. I alluded to some of your Medium pieces that came up when I searched on Google, and one of the things that came up that you were speaking about was the Excelsior Pass, COVID-related, kind of proving that you don't have COVID or that you're vaccinated, based in New York State. And it gave me goosebumps because A, it was a problem that we were all dealing with. How do you verify that this isn't a fake vaccine card? And are you vaccinated? Are you safe when you're at this event? Can you go with confidence knowing that you're not going to get sick? But the part that gave me goosebumps was that blockchain was involved. I just when I would hear about these technologies, I assumed that it was based around QR codes and just some basic databases and whatnot. But can you tell me more about that project and how you were involved with it and the role of blockchain in that project?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on there. I mean, first, let's talk about why it was important. And it's for a lot of reasons you listed, but I want to be very crisp in a couple of things that we really thought were meaningful. One, people did want to have confidence in a piece of information. And when you look at some of the other things that were out there, be it paper cards or printouts that people were running around with, those are really things that you can't trust. And historically, in the healthcare setting, the way you trusted a piece of healthcare information, a fact, was you would pay to have your physician send it to someone else. And that's expensive, it's inefficient, but it was really solving a problem of trust. You trusted something because it came from another doctor's office and it went directly from here to there via fax, via whatever. And what happened with Excelsior Pass that was so interesting and prompted some of my Medium articles as of late is that we took a fact and we divorced it from the healthcare community. So you could take a piece of medical information and you could entrust it to someone, but you could still know it was true. And this person, in case maybe my COVID status, if I've been tested or if I've been vaccinated or whatnot, that fact was self-custody. I had it myself. and you could scan it and still know that it was true. It wasn't just a card that I could have bought online that looked like the CDC card and I hand filled out. It wasn't that. It was actually a piece of information that through cryptography could be tied back to the issuing party. And that's a really, really big deal. And that kind of leads to the second half of your question about, well, so how does blockchain enable that? Because you said cryptography. A lot of people falsely believe that we were actually putting COVID information on a blockchain. We absolutely were not. You don't want to put medical information into an immutable blockchain. There's a few reasons for that. Patient confidentiality, all sorts of things that can be very problematic. What actually went onto the blockchain were keys, encryption keys. So back to my comment about you could take a fact and know that it was true, we would put the encryption keys of those providers out there on the blockchain. And so when you saw this fact come across, you could see the QR code, you know it was something that was signed through public-private encryption, and on the blockchain, you would have the keys that you could go grab and then unlock and make sure that that fact was really true, that it really did come from that issuing authority. So that's how blockchain played a role in it. That's also the power of what we did with the Excelsior Pass and the power of the QR code. We really enabled people to self-custody health information, and we did it in a way that preserved trust for all parties involved.
Yeah, that's freaking awesome. Blockchain has obviously existed for more than a decade at this point. This piece of technology from, when New York State said we want to do this, how fast could it be applied to this use case? Is it something that, was pretty built out and had been used in previous use cases and it took a couple months, or took much longer than that?
Yeah, so you're talking in a matter of weeks from when we started with this to when we were going live. And in fact, some of the longest parts of that were actually getting the app approved through the different stores, be it Google Play or the Apple App Store, and working with them. I don't mean to imply that they're slow. I'm just pointing out that we're talking about in terms of weeks, and anyone that's gone through that process knows at least 1 to 2 of those weeks is just going to be the security review and the other things that are part of getting posted on those marketplaces. We had a lot of this pre-built. We've done a lot of this thinking already. And you can apply this to a number of things. You can think about other government documents that you might want to issue digitally and sign, other instruments that the business community might use. So this concept of issuing a credential, having a key out on a blockchain that you can then reference back, is something that we had really ready to go. What took time was working through, okay, well, how do we want this branded? How do we want to communicate this to the public? How do we work with Apple and Google to make sure they're comfortable with what we're doing around security and privacy? That was as long as the rest of the development cycle, really.
Interesting. And obviously security plays a big part anytime you have health information of an individual. That's key. When talking to folks, whether it be in New York or other kind of decision makers that were making these decisions, how were y'all able to convey that this is a secure way of transmitting this data, and that it is going to preserve that, you're not putting that data on the blockchain, but that somehow someone's not going to be able to get this key and then access that data, or whatever, potential other ways of exploitation could be?
So the issuing authority, be it a healthcare provider, be it the state of New York through their vaccine registry, whatnot, those entities need to protect their private key, and we can help them do that. The public key, the way you actually made sure this really did come from a healthcare provider or the state of New York or whatnot, you actually want that to be very accessible. And so that's what we put out on the blockchain, and you can go and you can make sure you're actually pulling it down and you had the right one, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of a tale of two worlds. One thing you keep very private, the private key, the other you make very public. The concept about the actual credential itself, since that credential went to a specific person, they were able to self-custody it. It's really no different than the CDC card. You could start to say some of the same things about, well, what if you lose your CDC card? And those are different things that society has come to accept. It sounds weird, but in some ways, we're holding emerging technologies to a higher standard than we are historical technologies. So I would come back to that quick comment I made about the CDC card. No one really questioned if handwriting a CDC card when you got vaccinated and giving it to someone and hoping that did something with it, that didn't lose it, was a good idea. I mean, those things were this big. They didn't fit in anyone's wallet. They were completely unwieldy. I suspect a good number of them were lost within the first week of them being issued. And no one really thinks about that.
Yeah.
But somehow we're thinking about this when you talk about it being digital, but it's the same information. There's no difference between what was on the CDC card and what was in that digital credential. So I think we need to make sure we baseline ourselves around what do we already do today and what do we come to accept, and then what are we going to do in a digital world?
Yeah, that's a good perspective to look at it. You kind of talking about this use case, it really excites me, right? In the ER, I go to work every day, and an altered patient might come in and we have no idea what their medical history is. Are they on a blood thinner? Millions of or hundreds of things that could really affect how I treat that patient and what their course looks like over the upcoming, days, weeks, and months. And, the kind of, I guess, utopia is everyone's health data being stored on the blockchain, and them, being able to give you that access, and me, in a clinical setting, being able to get a good picture of what's going on with that patient, and then using that data to make decisions that are the best for them. Now, obviously, I know that's going to take a long, long time. That's going to require buy-in from, hospitals, insurance companies, technology companies, the government, individuals. What, if that is the utopia, how long do you think that takes? What are kind of 2 or 3 major hurdles that we need to get past? And what does that pathway to that place look like?
Yes, I think we're going to have the blockchain become a connectivity layer. I don't know that we're going to see people's healthcare information go directly onto the blockchain, but what I could see is the blockchain grant access for healthcare information across a variety of sources. Or I can also see the self-custodying of healthcare information, just like how the Excelsior Pass in New York was stored on someone's phone and they had the ability to self-custody that information, yet you still know it's true. I can see us pulling more and more information and allowing people to carry it with them on a mobile device or to store it in some kind of an online spot that they choose. And where we need to go, in my opinion, is divorcing the data from the EMRs. So when you think about right now, the large EMR players really lock up a lot of data. And even though you might have one provider and I go visit them and they've got the same EMR as the next provider I go to a specialist, yet it's very difficult and cumbersome to move that information around. I just don't think we're ever going to really solve that problem very well. Instead, I think what happens in the physical world, where people somehow take a document from one to the other, or you fax a document from one to the other, I think we're going to see that become more sophisticated and digitized. And I think that's going to happen through the blockchain, through these keys, where you can take a piece of information, pull it out of a EMR, know that it's still accurate when you present it to another EMR. And that's going to be responsibility of the patient, and they're going to self-custody that information as they go from point of care to point of care.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the most frustrating things in my day-to-day, right? Someone goes to a hospital a few days before, across the street, they got a CT scan, they come here. Worst case scenario, I have zero access to that. Best case scenario, maybe they bring a CD and then that CD is like not compatible with our software and we still can't get it. And if you're in the ER and need to make these quick decisions, you have to unfortunately order another CT scan. You can't wait for, if it's not business hours, for getting that result the next day. And so I guess how best case scenario, worst case scenario, how long do you think that takes? Is that something we see in the next decade, longer than that, shorter than that?
I think you kind of have to sort it by country. So I've seen some stuff going on in Asia where that vision you just laid out is either available today or coming online very quickly. And then I think you've got other more profitable and perhaps technologically mature countries that are starting down a path, but that path isn't quite the one we want. And so we started down this EMR and this meaningful use journey, but we didn't really fully address compatibility. So now you have this very large deploy base of technology solutions here in the United States and some other countries. And it's really become kind of medical technical debt because when you look at people that have jumped straight to much more of a Web3 mentality around healthcare and having some kind of a blockchain or the ability for people to self-custody information, they're arguably going to get to where you're describing sooner because they're starting at a less technology indebted place. And in some ways, you can almost draw an analogy to how people that skipped the landline and went straight to mobile phones actually have more sophisticated telecommunication networks today than we do in what we consider the more developed world. And it's somewhat because we spent a lot of time deploying landlines. And through that, we kind of got some technical debt about connectivity, about what telecommunications needs to look like. And so for us to then pivot and to go to a mobile first world and to turn off all these landlines is a bit more challenging than if you just go straight to a world of mobile. You're going to have the same thing play out as you look at healthcare information and moving information like you're describing.
Absolutely. What are like 1 or 2 countries in Asia that you see maybe at the forefront of this? Because I kind of want to delve down and look into them.
Yeah, so I don't want to call any out too specifically, but I would say some
Yeah.
of the countries in Southeast Asia, there's some technology companies that are doing some really interesting things there around what does an EMR really need to be? How does it look? It's almost like, what if you had an EMR that was a headless system? And by that, I mean, what if you just stored the data, but you could have a variety of presentation layers? And again, the analogy with this would almost be like the way the web evolved. There used to be at the bottom of all these web pages that would say viewed best on Mosaic or viewed best on Netscape or things like that. And then we got enough maturity around how we defined web pages that suddenly it didn't matter. You could use any web browser and still have the same experience when you went to visit that web page. I think we need to kind of get to that same mentality around what goes on with EMRs. The data is the data, and the presentation layer is independent of that. And when you get to that mentality, then suddenly the data can become much more fluid, and you can start to self-custody it, and people can take it onto their Google or their Android or their Apple, whatever device, along with enabling a better way of doing interoperability.
Makes sense. One of the other things that health data is, I guess, used in is a bunch of people have Apple Watches, Nike smart devices, other companies that gather data and that are useful to the individual to some capacity, but in a lot of those cases that data belongs to those corporations and they can do whatever they see fit with it. There is a NFT project, it's called Stefan, and it's basically you buy this NFT of a sneaker, and there's different like types of sneakers, and it tracks you allow it to track how much you're walking and what where you're walking and whatnot. And they obviously gather that data, but they pay you for it. So there's folks that are walking and getting paid for this NFT that they own, and at least you're, I guess, getting paid for it. And so I guess my question is, do you see kind of more smart devices, wearable devices, things of that nature kind of delving into this world and kind of making us, at least be able to monetize some off that data, if not own it outright?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a couple things going on. I mean, how much is, if you get 100,000 people doing step data, okay, that's interesting. If you get 1 million, that's interesting. You get 1 billion, that's interesting, but you actually maybe no longer are getting as much value because there's so much of it out there that the price point starts to collapse, right? So I think there's a whole very interesting economic thing that's going to happen around discrete things. Where it's going to get even more interesting, though, is when you start layering in the other things. Okay, what if you happen to have a certain condition or a rare disease, and then I can get your step data. And now I can start to really get very dialed into, well, what's the utility I can drive and insights from your specific data? I think that's going to be another interesting market to watch. And then also core to your question is there going to be a market for this? I think there is, as we see today with these companies that turn around and sell our data already. Is it going to make any of us a ton of money? Probably not. But is it something that we should be compensated for in some fashion? Yeah, probably. I don't quite know how the end game is going to play here. And I think you've seen a lot of really interesting experiments in selling data and allowing people the ability to sell their data. I think some people probably just give their data away, but they want to be consented into giving their data away, and they'll do it if they think it benefits society. So there's a lot of things still to go here, but the fundamental premise of moving to more of a Web3 world where centralized gatekeepers don't have all the decision rights over a piece of information is the journey we're on.
Makes sense. Makes sense. The thing that I'm still probably trying to grasp my head around is the metaverse. It's this vague term, and there's all types of stuff in it. Kind of from my best understanding of it, in terms of like it being ready for industries and whatnot, gaming probably is going to be the first thing that takes use of the metaverse and where people really interact there. One kind of conversation I was having with someone talked about how scientific research could have a big spot there in terms of removing barriers of university zoning data or whatever other entity being able to work and simulate thousands and hundreds of thousands of experiments and being able to interact with folks across the globe, and kind of bringing down those barriers and being able to use that as a scientific research tool on certain projects. My kind of general question, I guess, is the metaverse something that is much further away than, say, the blockchain technology that we talked about in the Excelsior Pass, and using that kind of more on a day-to-day basis? Or is it something that's closer to us? And do you see any use cases in healthcare that are more tangible than this kind of vague promise of it could be useful for research one day, or whatever the case may be?
So I think we still have a lot of unanswered questions around what does the metaverse look like. I know there was a lot of hope during a recent Apple event that they were going to talk about some new hardware that would help bring in the metaverse. You see what Microsoft just recently did, backing away from HoloLens. You've got what's going on with Facebook Meta and their projects. So I feel there's still a lot of really interesting experimentation on the hardware side. And until we really kind of get that nailed down in the right form factor, then we're really not going to be able to unlock what the metaverse could potentially be. In much the same way that commerce didn't really unlock until the iPhone and all the different gizmos that went into the iPhone allowed us to order the nearest food to us, a cab near us, take a picture and order it online. That was kind of the unlock for that next level of retail. And I think we're still waiting for our iPhone-like moment to really unlock the metaverse. That said, I think the blockchain is much further along. It's much more real, but it's something that if we do it right, no one's really going to know. We spend a lot of time talking about the blockchain and blockchains and all those things, coins and NFTs, but it's super confusing for the average person. And it really just needs to kind of be abstracted away. The reason email works is because email works. The reason the web works is because the web works. And there's people that talk about how hard it used to be to get on the web. You had to get a CD from America Online. Maybe you had to install drivers on your computer. Or you had to buy a network card. When you start to abstract away all that, suddenly it becomes very real and tangible and invisible at the same time. I think blockchain's much closer to that than the metaverse is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like when when you send a text message, you don't think about whatever satellites are involved and cables and whatnot. It just happens, and that's all that matters. Are there any other things happening in healthcare that are using blockchain today in a very tangible way, like that pass that we talked about, that you're impressed with, or you think is interesting in kind of pushing this space forward, that are on your radar?
So I think the pass, like you alluded to, is very interesting. I think there's a lot of interesting work going on within supply chain. I think there's some interesting work going on within the very complicated world of drug pricing and chargebacks, rebates. I've also seen some stuff that's going on around recalls and product inserts, and how do you handle that. I think you can look at some blockchain use cases that are helping with the challenges around drug shortages. I think all those are very tangible problems today that blockchain brings some unique ways of attempting to solve. I don't want to go too into this, but I'm seeing also some stuff around clinical trials, eligibility, inclusion, exclusion. How do you find people for trials? I think there's a lot going on in that space too. That's very interesting. If you kind of come out of more of a pharmaceutical life sciences, look more at the provider side, outcomes-based contracting, seeing some stuff around that, around care delivery, not just on the therapeutic they're taking, but around the care. that's being administered, and the ability to pull in potential wearable data to see if people are doing things they need to do. So you can decide, okay, well, is it a bad patient or a bad doctor if you're not getting the outcome that's desired? And I think some of that arbitration and smart contract technology can really bring the cost of administering some of those contracts down from where it sits today.
Nice. Yeah, that gives me some rabbit holes to go down and do some Google searches. I went to my first Web3 NFT conference last month, VCon. It was the first and only one I've been to so far, and it was, a great learning experience. Interacted with a lot of smart people working on different projects, listening to folks talk about stuff. The one thing I didn't see was I definitely, in terms of the people that I interacted with, was the only person from the medical world or healthcare. And there weren't any speakers from that world or anything like that. I was surprised and pleasantly surprised. You were at Consensus this past week, and I saw some of your tweets, and there obviously was some healthcare presence there. And so I guess my question is, you've probably been to a couple, if not a lot of events like this. What do you see the healthcare presence there being? Was Consensus, did they have a lot, or was it just a few panels? And do you see the trend changing? And just, I guess, the in-person events, and if you could just shed some light on that.
Yeah, I'd say Consensus was encouraging to me because it's really the first time that I saw a meaningful push into the healthcare space at one of the web conferences. And I think it's a bit of a recoiling from either conversations about money, Bitcoin, tokens, or art, NFTs. I think we're starting to see that there's other industries out there that could benefit from this, and we're starting to see some entrepreneurs really focus on it. There were a number of sessions, meetups, et cetera, during Consensus, and I went to the last one pre-pandemic, and there was no one talking about this at all. Maybe a couple supply chain use cases, but it was supply chain industry agnostic. Here at Consensus, it's just wrapped up a couple days after you and I are recording this. We really saw some very specific use cases and companies that were developing and starting to get some funding.
That's good to see. Hopefully it continues to head in that direction. Some of the, talking about Bored Apes or CryptoPunks is fun, but it's more fun to talk about things that are solving some real world problems. I guess my final question would be, there's a lot of millennial people that I interact with in healthcare, and there is some interest, in this Web3 NFT world. And people want to get involved. Obviously, not everyone's going to start a big project. Not everyone's going to, be, involved in some deep way. But what would you say is a good first step? Is it, listening to a certain podcast? Is it, just learning about what blockchain is? Is it not even that, and just trying to, I guess that's a question. What's that first step if someone's curious and they want to kind of dabble in this world, but it not being them founding some massive project?
Yeah, I think really the education is the most important thing, and I would invite people to take a look at some of my articles out on Medium. I think a number of different podcasts are available, be it Bankless is good just to kind of understand what's going on, although it skews a little bit too much in the financial realm. There's kind of a number of things that you could go take a look at. I would definitely go look at A16Z and where they're investing from a portfolio perspective. They've got a good handle on some very interesting Web3 companies, some of which are healthcare or are kind of utility type challenges or utility type companies that'll work across a number of industries. The other thing I would say is don't get enamored with the financial and chasing coins and tokens and whatnot. I think we have a lot of people that are very interested in this, but then they very quickly fall victim to hearing how you can make a quick buck, and it's the gold rush, internet gold rush. I think it's time to accept that a lot of that initial euphoria and first mover opportunity has probably moved away. So there's first mover opportunity and net new ideas. There's not first mover opportunity and I'm going to go find the next cryptocurrency that's going to the moon. So just kind of come into it with that mentality and you'll be well served.
Yeah, absolutely. I even in May when I went to that conference, they were like, "Oh, bear market's here," and then looking over what's happened the past month, and where things are headed. You couldn't have said it better. It's not about making the quick buck, but learning about the technology and really focusing on that. Thanks so much for chatting with me. I really appreciated you sharing some of your insights, and thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Absolutely. You're based out of Austin, is that right?
Correct.
Awesome, awesome. I went to college there, so I always love visiting, and hope to run into you there at some point.
Excellent. One time when you're in town for a Horns game or something, shoot me a text or hit me on Twitter and we'll catch up. Okay.
Will do. You take care. Thank you.
Yeah.